All right, okay. So on this week's edition of OBF Unplugged, I'm here with my man David Nolan on the show. Dave, how are you keeping?
Not too bad, Adrian. An absolute pleasure to be here today, and I appreciate you taking the time to have a chat with me. And I know how much effort goes into these, both on air and off air. So I do appreciate the work you're doing.
Not at all, man. I appreciate you for coming on. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to put a bit of a twist on this one today. So we're going to speak about the GA athlete and the GA coach, and we're going to merge them together in some scenarios based on different types of the season, different parts of the season, or different situations in the season, and how maybe we can give some of our insights in some principles around how we could deal with those. How does that sound, Dev?
It sounds interesting, and hopefully I don't get trapped in kind of my own words at times.
Yeah, it is all right. I'm sure we'll dive down many rabbit holes anyway, so we won't get trapped, I'm sure. So, okay, so let's start this with the preseason. So we'll start at the start of the season, the preseason, and let's look at this from the coach's perspective, okay? So what, from your experience, would be the one or two principles that you would like or you would recommend every coach to apply or you would apply in the coaching setting?
Well, I think the purpose of the preseason and everything, just to put a kind of disclaimer at the start, everything we're going to talk about today comes within the context and the environment that you find yourself in. So it depends on how the previous season has went and whether you finished on a high or whether you had a poor season. So I suppose it very much depends on how you're coming into the preseason. So we have to understand the whole environment and context you're coming into. But the preseason, essentially, as it says, I I think people often overlook the words we use. We use certain words for a reason. It's pre-season, it's before the season. So its main aim is to prepare us for the season. So that's what I want to do. At the end of a preseason, I want to have a group of players that I can put into a game-based scenario, and they're going to, be able to play 60 minutes at a good level of performance, and we've lowered their known injury risk factors. I suppose primarily the first thing that, and it depends on whether you're working at county or club level, the first thing you have to ensure is that we have everyone singing off the same hymn sheet from the start. So buy-in. The main principle as a coach, I think you need to emphasize at the start of preseason, is buy-in. So have a chat with the players, put the ball in their court. It's like, okay, let's reflect on last season. What do you think the focus should be of the preseason? Put the ball into their court, because all of a sudden then I'm not coming in as an authoritative figure where I'm saying this is what you need to get good at, because if that is what I'm doing, that straight away puts a hierarchical structure in place that I'm up here, you are down here. I know what you guys should work on. I know what you're good at. I know what you're bad at. And I have this kind of roadmap where, for me anyway, coaching, it's a symbiotic relationship. We feed off each other. You should be with your athletes to know why they're doing it and get that buy-in. And for me, I like to start off that conversation of putting the ball into the team's court and have a very open, frank conversation. And if it depends, obviously, if you've been with them the previous season or not. If it's a new team you're with, that's a different context then again. But okay, let's reflect on last year. What did we do? What did we think a bit about it? What could we do better this year? Or what do you guys think needs to be the focus of your preseason? Then you let them voice their opinions. Then you voice your opinions, and then discuss where the kind of dissonance between those two viewpoints comes, and then come to a consensus on how we move forward as a team. But for me, the biggest factors that I tend to see, that's from a more, I suppose, holistic viewpoint, from actual practical information. As an S&C coach, generally what I tend to see is lacking is body composition is usually quite poor in the preseason. So in the preseason, now in an ideal world, it's handled in the off season when we really don't care about performance. But when in the preseason, we're not playing matches. If you have to go play a match for Saturday and your performance is down because you're in a calorie deficit or whatever, I don't really care, because there's no major consequence to that. Where if you come into in season or in championship and you're carrying too much lumber there and you have a poor performance because of it, then there's a big consequence for you and the team. So body composition is one of the main factors I like to focus on, because we can do a ton of work to get guys stronger and more force output, but it's usually much easier just to knock off a bit of that extra body fat we're carrying around. So we sport as a whole, especially field-based sport, it usually comes down to this idea of relative strength. How much force can you produce for a given body weight? Guys that have higher relative strength jump higher, cut quicker, move faster. And this is purely from the athletic characteristics. You can talk about skills and that kind of stuff, but just from an S&C perspective, I think it's far much easier to knock off a few kilos of unwanted body fat than it is to add the 5, 10 or 20 kilos to the 1RM that would result in the same increase in relative strength. Mm-hmm. So if we can, and most GA guys can do both at the same time. They can get leaner while getting stronger. So now we're attacking relative strength from both sides. We're increasing the maximal force capacity, i.e. your strength, and we're also decreasing the body weight, making you leaner. So now we're getting increase in relative strength from both perspectives because the body weight is coming down while the strength is going up. So instead of just saying to increase relative strength, we focus on strength or we focus on body weight. Why not both? And then we get this massive increase in relative strength. And all of a sudden, and that success breeds success, and that creates momentum because once players then start to feel themselves jumping higher, moving quicker, and just getting less tired because they're carrying around less extra baggage, so their endurance goes up, then they're like, okay, they're starting to feel the success. Success breeds success, and success breeds adherence because that's what we want. We want buy-in and adherence, and it's very cyclic. If you're getting success, then you get a transient increase in motivation. Increased motivation leads to greater buy-in and adherence to the program. We know that greater adherence to anything usually breeds greater or results in greater success at that. So if you're doing something more and more focused, and then that feeds back in because you're adhering to the program and buying into it better, therefore their adaptation to training is going to be better. And then their motivation increases again because of this and their self-efficacy. So we get a nice cyclic environment going here. And also, again, and maybe this is the bit of kind of the nerd in me, the scientist in me, I think a lot of S&Cs and sports scientists look at our data, look at the units we measure stuff in, because there is a reason we measure stuff in units. VO2 max, what is it measured in? It's measured in milliliters per kg of body weight per minute. So the quickest way to increase your VO2 max or your aerobic capacity, it's not to do a 6 or 8 week running program. It's to drop a few kilos of body weight. You can stay at the same level of fitness per se, but if you reduce your body weight by a couple of kilos, shed that unwanted fat, all of a sudden your VO2 max has gone up. So, and VO2 max is relative to body weight then as well. So you reduce that body weight, your relative strength goes up, your VO2 max goes up, even though you mightn't have actually increased, say, the efficiency of your lungs and your cardiorespiratory system. But because that same system is then working on a smaller engine, it's able to generate more power and it's able to last longer. It's this idea of I hate using a car analogy because it oversimplifies the complexity of the human body. But, you know, what do we do in rallying and Formula One? Do they keep increasing the size of the engine? No, they find ways to make it lighter, to strip bits away. So that's what we can do as well. We can spend a lot of the time, because it's very expensive and time consuming to increase the size of an engine, which is the same with the human body. Adaptation takes a while. To increase the aerobic capacity through training can take a while. Or I can just strip a little bit away, make the car lighter, and therefore the same engine with the same power capacity can move that car longer and faster because it doesn't have to move the same level of mass. Does that make sense?
100%, yeah, 100%. I think there's some great points in that. And if I could go back to the buy-in at the start, I'm involved with a rugby team here in Limerick, and we put the players at the center of the process and the planning process, and we had a poker chip night. Okay. So what we actually done was, it was a day, we had our team kind of bonding day, and then we finished the day with this, okay? The whole purpose and the objective of the poker chip night was to break down barriers in terms of bring everyone into the one room, and we had a representative of the club, we had the S&C coach, we had the physiotherapist, we had the backs coach, we had the forwards coach, we had the management, we had the head coach, and then we had the players. So everyone got €2,500 worth of chips. And what we done was we grouped them up into their representative and their respective groups. So we had management in one group, we had S&C, and they all hedged their bets on what they felt the most important capacities were to build for the team to be successful going forward. So then I actually facilitated it with a whiteboard. So the S&C coach and the physio were actually pretty close in an awful lot of what they said anyway. The forwards coach and the backs coach were pretty tied with a lot of what they said. But what happened was we ended up with a kind of a global representation of, okay, we all have what we feel is important here. So what the group have hedged most of their bets on, we combine them together, and now we can start to put a cohesive plan in place with the players at the center of the whole planning process. It was excellent because what happened was the backs, they wanted to play the game a certain way. So then we said, right, okay, so we have a lot of high speed demands here now. So next thing, the physio puts his hand up and says, okay, well, no, with a lot of high speed demands, we're going to need a lot of hamstring capacity. And then it shoots over to the S&C coach and says, okay, well, we need a little bit of time for this. And all of a sudden we start to paint a little bit of picture, and the players start to realize that, okay, if I want to play the game this way, then I need a bit of an input from the S&C coach, and I need a little bit of an input from the physio, and we need to create this cohesive plan together. And it was really, really, really good. And we ended up finishing that session with a really good visual expression of where we all fitted in, as opposed to a hierarchical structure where we all fitted in the process of the team going forward. That kind of makes sense?
That. Yeah, it's a great leveler. And what I like about that is, say, for example, more than likely, I'd say Nordic curls or some sort of eccentric lengthening exercise of the hamstring was going to always be in your S&C program. I'm not going to make that assumption, but for most field-based sports, there is going to be some sort of eccentric lengthening exercise of the hamstring. But it's not you coming in and saying this is going into the program and you explain to them why it's going into the program, but it's more of a case of them telling you this is how we want to play. And the physio's like, well, if that's the way you have to play, this is what you need. And now all of a sudden the guys are looking to you saying, this is what we want from the S&C program. Tell us how we can get that from it. So it's not you. They almost feel like they're writing the S&C program, that you're just filling in the spaces for them.
100%. And again, like, it was a nod in the hat to the self-determination theory of motivation. And we have this big chunk of a nugget of perceived autonomy. And either way, the player wants to play the game in a certain way. So obviously he has the autonomy to play the game what way he wants to play. But then that perception of autonomy comes in where we say, right, okay, if you, back to what you said, we do have these high speed demands, then we do need to have some form of hamstring capacity in our programming. And I could give 3 exercises there that are all essentially doing the same job. And I say, right, pick one or 2. So you have the perception to choose whatever you want to choose, but they're all giving the same net result in terms of what the outcome is going to be.
I like that. And what I like then as well, it's from the outset, it's not 3 or 4 different stakeholders putting a plan together. It's all stakeholders into one plan. Therefore, even if it fails and you have a poor season, you failed as a unit. You know what I mean? That no one person puts up their hand, or we can't put blame on one area more than another, because cohesively as a group, we all came up with this plan, so we fail or die together.
Yeah, 100%. And ironically enough, I would say ironically, not surprisingly, because I expected it to come up, but every single person who had, or not person, any single player, coach, manager, club representative, a big part of where they put their chips was enjoyment. And it's amazing that when you see enjoyment in every single area on the board, that sometimes we forget to add that into the process as well. And like, that was an AIL rugby team, right? So you can imagine, because the team of this now is GA, like 99% of lads want to kick ball or hit a sliotar at the beginning to enjoy it. Because whether it be a junior B team or a senior team, if enjoyment isn't part of the nucleus of why you're doing it, then very, very quickly that can erode buy-in throughout the preseason.
And with that, with the guys, was that open-ended or predefined, as in, was there 10 boxes? Was enjoyment one box, speed another, or did the groups organically come up with what the factors were themselves?
100% organic, but they were going to bias what they wanted anyway, so a physio is going to want adherence to what he's doing, so he's going to, we have this natural tendency to think that our jobs are that little bit more important anyway, so it was about finding a commonality among all. And definitely enjoyment was one. So we didn't preempt anything, we didn't make it multiple choice or anything like that. It was a case of, and we debated. The one thing we did debate was splitting backs and forwards, and it was a kind of a little bit of a debate. But then we thought, let's split them and let's see what comes out of it, and it worked really, really well.
Yeah, and I think even a lot of coaches probably would be hesitant to do it, but it shows a certain degree of humility and vulnerability, which I don't know. I think maybe it's and a lot of younger S&Cs struggle with it. But for creating buy-in and human connection and rapport with your players, showing a bit of vulnerability is usually a surefire way of developing a relationship with someone on a more, I suppose, deeper level.
Absolutely, yeah. Because you're just coming down into the trenches with people. Like, we had a TikTok challenge with a team there during the lockdown, and I fired up my TikTok in among the group, and it was like, I seen some of the selectors find up their TikTok, and it was brilliant. And they got more of a response from the players than some of what you would see as being the better players among their peers. Because there's a human side to showing that vulnerability, and then you're breaking down these hierarchical barriers, and you're just one of the lads. And at the end of the day, you want to be part of the group, not ahead of the group or on top of the group or looking down at the group.
I think so. And if I remember correctly, I think Mark Lyons, I remember Mark Lyons with Gangnam Style, I think.
Yeah, that's right.
Look out for me.
That's right. Actually, I saw that one. Yeah. Okay, so we're moved on past the preseason. I think that if I could finish the preseason with, at least, I think we're definitely seeing at this point that a lot of coaches are actually starting to train the sport in some capacity from day one. And I think that's a good thing. If I go back to when I was playing 10 years ago, preseason, we didn't see a ball for 6 weeks, you know what I mean? And all of a sudden we're thrown into a match game scenario and the match play demands. But at least now we know that it doesn't obviously have to be full match play. It can be just simple drills. We can integrate an awful lot with the ball in our hands and actually train the sport from day one. Because even when we think about it, let's call a spade a spade. If you're involved with a club team and you come back in mid-January, you're going to have a league match in 6 weeks, right? So is it going to be poor execution of the skills, or is it going to be lack of physical preparation that really leads to losing a game? And more often than not, it's poor execution of the skills, or it's some tactical or technical deficiency that does that.
Yeah, and I think, the way I do always phrase it, a bit coming in, having average fitness and well above average skill execution is always going to be better than having above average fitness and below average skill execution. You know what I mean? So even if the fitness and athletic performance or the athletic characteristics aren't fully there, if your team can execute skills better than most others, that can make up for a shortfall in the fitness side of things. But if you have really a huge deficit in the skill execution, the fitness usually can't make up for that, because you can run all day, but if you can't catch a ball, field a high ball, execute pass, execute tackles, it doesn't really matter. You're still going to get blown out of water by guys who might be slower or not as fit, but my God, they can read a game, they can execute the skills, and they can put a ball over the bar. And like that, as we said, it really is coming back to this buy-in and enjoyment. Why do people play? And especially at club level, you don't go there to get fit and run as such. Yes, that might be one factor, but you go to play at football. That's what you're doing. It's called football training or hurling training. You're going there to actually enjoy the game. So if you don't get to do that, guys that join running clubs, if running is all they wanted to do, you know what I mean? And we know the research is there. We can use small-sided game. We can use game-based drills. I'm not saying that 100% of training needs to be done with a ball in the hand or with some sort of, yes, there's place for just isolated fitness work. But definitely, just for the enjoyment and adherence and the crack and banter, it's good to have the ball in there. And especially coming into the season, like one thing I should have said with the preseason is, and this is always, is from an SC perspective, you also want to be identifying the known risk factors for injury and working on reducing those. But I think that can't be fully done without game-based scenarios, because I can do any sort of conditional drills, everything like that, but the movement patterns that we see when you are jumping to catch a ball, when you're receiving a ball, when you're passing, the demands and the what would you say, the moment arms, the force vectors that are going through the joints, ligaments, hips, everything like that, you can't replicate them without game-based scenarios. Because how many times have we seen it, even anecdotally? You know, you in lockdown, loads of people have seen it, that, you know, even guys that trained hard, did running 4 or 5 days a week and all this, still that first night back when you're getting a ball in hand, you're twisting, you're turning, you're bollocksed after a few minutes, because it's this idea of match fitness. It is a different type of fitness, because the isolated fitness training cannot replicate the movement variability that we see in game-based scenarios.
Yep, 100%. And then the chaotic environment in the game where we have perception and cognitive demands and the neural fatigue that's associated with that then as well.
Exactly. And that is the cognitive element then in skill development then as well. You know what I mean? And coordination. You have to be able to time when to move, how much force to move in relation to external stimuli, which is the ball and the movement of your opponents.
Yeah, it's like, and I didn't want to jump in there a minute ago. Like, we watch a match, right? And you see a team pulling away in the last couple of minutes, and straight away to the naked eye, the lad above in the stand will turn around and he'll say, well, sure, they were the fitter team, they finished stronger. But the truth of it is, maybe they just tactically and technically outmaneuvered the team for 55 minutes, and that team were just so exhausted for the last 5 minutes because of this inefficient energy that they wasted, because they're tactically and technically not as good as the other team, and then the other team just pulled away for the last 5 minutes. So it doesn't necessarily mean they're fitter, but if you're chasing shadows, or if you're technically not or tactically not as good as another team / player, then there's going to be wasted energy and inefficient movement and everything that goes with that then as well.
Exactly. And I think you don't need to be 5 yards faster than your man if you're 5 yards smarter than your man. That's something I often say. You know what I mean? If you are able to read the better and anticipate better and be in the space. So I'd rather be, what would you say, jogging into the space, because jogging into 3 or 4 yards of space because I've timed it better, than sprinting 20 yards to get into the space because I didn't see it in time and didn't move correctly. Like, great players, we often see people like, God, were able to spot the space and run into the space better. That is true to a certain fact, but great players don't run into space. They create the space to run into. They, you know what I mean? They manipulate the game scenario on their opponents in order to create that space. And then it looks, to the naked eye, it looks like, God, they were able to spot that space so easily. How did no one realize that that space was open? When you break it down and maybe go back 10, 20 seconds before that happened, in a good player, that's calculated. And oftentimes it's just through repetition, it's unconsciously calculated. They don't even know that they're doing this, but they're manipulating their opponent into moving one way and creating a space in which to run into then. And then they don't need to be the fastest player because they're a more intelligent player. And you know what I mean? Yes, you know, speed is always good, but we know that if you're not someone who's fast, you're never going to be fast. We can train you to get faster, but you're probably never going to be what we know as fast because there's a huge genetic component to it. So if you're never going to be the fastest guy, then you're better off trying to work off to be the more intelligent guy or girl and be able to create that space to run into.
100%. And there's nothing worse than an energetic fool. Sure, there isn't. An energetic fool can do a lot of trouble.
I think even sports scientists are to blame to that. I'll look back at our own kind of community for that, and that is, we've very much gamified sports in recent years, especially GA, and especially since the introduction of GPS units. We look at laptops instead of looking at the game too much of the time. And we look at it in a very binary way. And the problem is, most sports scientists that argue, maybe it's a bit harsh, but a lot of guys are using GPS units in GAA don't really understand the software that well enough, or don't understand data analysis well enough that they can actually dig into the data. So they can't actually dig into, because why do we collect data? We want data to provide information, and the information to provide insight. And, the insight then informs decision making. Most guys get stuck at the data level. They're not able to change that chunky binary data into actionable information. And that's, I'm going to say, through no fault of their own. It's because it takes a long time to understand data analysis, to really get into statistical analysis, to understand that. So because of that, a lot of guys and coaches, managers want a GPS, but a lot of guys, because they don't have that skill set, and I'd include myself in that, they probably can't dig too deep down into the data analysis side of a GPS unit. We get stuck at this surface level. So we get stuck with the surface level metrics that it chucks back out at us. And what is that? Total distance. How often do we just see this? It's like, how much distance are you covering in a game? I don't really give a shit about how much different or distance you cover in a game. I give a shit about what you did with that distance. So the metric that I like to look at is not total distance covered, but it's impressions or influence per set. So if you have, how many runs you make, or how much distance you cover. If we looked at that now, instead of looking at total difference, Adrian covered 8 kilometers, David covered 6. If we broke that down into a metric of impact per kilometer, now that's a metric that starts to interest me. So with the distance that you move versus I move, who made the most impact? So if we had Adrian running 10K, he's made 5 positive impacts on the game. So you know what I mean? And a positive impact can be making a run that pulls a defender out of space and opens up a space for someone else. It doesn't have to be getting on the ball. But if you made 5 positive impacts, we call it, per 10 kilometers. So you're making 1 positive impact per 2 kilometers, or 0.5 impacts per kilometer. Now, if I only run half the distance, so I cover 5 kilometers, but I make 10 positive impacts on the game, I've covered half the distance you have, but I've put down 2 positive impacts per kilometer covered. 4 times what you've done. So you've worked twice as hard as I have in terms of total distance, but I've made 4 times the positive impacts on the game that you have. But because we're stuck at this surface level and we get kind of blinded by numbers sometimes, we don't look at the game holistically in that way. We look at, well, Adrian's covering twice as much ground. He's running. His work rate's tremendous. Now, you're running around like a headless chicken with a team if we actually dig into the data. And that's what I think good coaching is to be able to take this data, turn it into information, and then bring another level more to turn that into insight. Yeah. And that's what we're looking for. We're trying to convert data into insight. And that's advice I would give to aspiring and young sports scientists. Don't get blinded by the data. Understand what the data is telling you. The data helps you inform the decision making. The data isn't the decision maker.
Yeah, and players are intelligent to that as well. Like players, we have to give players an awful lot more credit than what we do sometimes. Like I've been in scenarios where I know a player has had a bad game and I've uploaded his GPS data and I'll get a message off him and he'll cling on to the one metric that he is improved on, even though he's had a really poor performance. So let's just say his distance per minute is up. And he'll text me the following day and he'll say, geez, my distance per minute is up from the last match, with a smiley face, Yeah. And because he's clinging to that. And the other side of that is you also have the player who's just a baller and all he wants to do is play a ball. And he'll know his metrics are down, but he might have kicked 3 points. And he'll cling on to, come here, yeah, someone might have covered, 72 meters per minute, but I kicked 3 points over the bar. So players are intelligent around that stuff as well. They'll find they can manipulate their own metrics to suit their own bias or to, validate their own performance in their own head. So how we use it. And there's a trade-off as well, especially for younger coaches, it's the contract we sign. When we start to use and really become indebted to technology, then we lose the softer skills of being able to see things. Like I was doing a jumps profile with a team there. It was back in February or something like that. And I was halfway through the jump profile and this light bulb went off in my head and I thought, Adrian, you haven't even looked at a jump. My head was just down on my iPad and I was just going from the iPad to the computer, and I was thinking to myself, right, okay, I'm videoing them, I can look at them afterwards, but I haven't even looked at the jump. I had not looked at a jump in maybe 6 or 7 jumps. But the truth of it is, it's a trade-off,
Yeah. And this is the trap that I see too much sports, especially GA, fall into, this over gamification is the technical term to use of it. And like that, you do see players manipulate. Players are intelligent. They know that if the management is using this data as one of their main factors for selection, they will manipulate that data. I've seen training sessions where you have guys running back and forth across the pitch to get their total distance up, or to keep their heart rate up, because people are looking at average heart rate, and if it goes down too much, they'll think I'm not working as hard as the other guys. So they're running around expending energy, stuff that in a match you'd like, this is stupidity, to game the data. And like that, when you talk about this idea of clever players move less, we just know it. Like, what do we want our full forwards to do? Do we want them to be running all over the place and having to take 20, 30 yards to get every score? Or do you want a full forward that has timing down to it perfect, that they know they can time it, that when the appropriate pass comes, they move 3-4 steps in to collect the ball, and they turn and bang, split the post every time? They're the lethal full forwards. As a back, I'm a back myself. I hate to mark. I like a guy that'll turn and maybe take me on and want to run and twist and turn. It's those forwards that can make a 5-meter dart, collect the ball into their chest, turn either left and right and kick without even looking at the posts, and split the posts. So their total distance is significantly less than many other forwards, but the amount of scores they're getting is significantly more. So that's what we want. So as management and players, even if we don't directly say it, players know if we are using that data to make those type of decisions rather than actually looking at the training as such, then that'll start to change what you're non-verbally communicating to the team as what's important, of what we want you to do in order to get selected. Do we want you to become skillful and be a dangerous player in any position and be able to execute the skills well and put the ball over the bar? Or do we want you just to be a better athlete that can cover more ground faster and have a higher heart rate than other people? And as I said, that data is valuable, but I think it's valuable when you look at it both on much more of a retrospective thing. I think it's a good idea to observe the game, observe the training without hearing that data in real time, jot down notes. Now, I think it is important for most coaches to have some degree of note taking, and whether that's taking a few notes on the phone between drills, writing them down in a notebook, or even hooking a microphone recording device up to yourself for a few different reasons. And we can talk. I think that's something that I would recommend most coaches do, is hook a microphone to themselves at some point. But because what we know is, and there's plenty of research to show it, when we retrospectively try to recall what happened at training and how players perform, we're very bad at remembering what actually happened. So if we have our notes that are taken down in real time, we know how we're perceiving everyone's performance and the team performance as a whole to be going on in real time. That's when we sit down and look at the data. We're like, this is what I compare, this is what I thought happened as I perceived it. This is what the objective data is saying. Okay, now this is where that data is now offering information to combine what you have perceived with the objective information, and that's insight. That's when you're getting true insight into how your team and individuals are performing, in my opinion anyway.
Yeah, 100%. It's where I guess we're merging the art and the science of coaching, isn't it? Somewhere there, it's where we're starting to, I suppose, just get an integration of the hard and the softer skills. It just reminded me of a really funny story, right? I went to an under-12 hurling match, and it was going back before lockdown, and this small fella came in, corner forward. He was playing with our local club, and before the ball was thrown in, he hit the lad he was marking the belt of his shoulder, and he started running around the field, okay? And I was watching him, and he honestly, in the space of about 30 seconds, he sprinted diagonally, zigzag across the field, right? And he carried it on for about a minute, and your man followed him, the corner back, and then after about a minute, the corner back must have thought to himself, I forget about this, let this fall off, right? But the ball came down to him, and he actually hadn't the energy to rise the ball, and his two hands were on his hips, okay? And he was just gassed. And ironically enough, I watched the same young lad a couple of times since, and he has never done it again. So he has learned from it. But he was obviously after watching a couple of matches, and he was mimicking a couple of inter-county lads. It was comical, you know.
Yeah.
All right, okay. So we're going to the player now, all right? So that was from the coach's standpoint, or coach's perspective, okay? So it's January. You now get your schedule from the player, okay? So you have a night off on a Monday night, you have a field session Tuesday night, you have a gym session Wednesday night, you have a night off Thursday night, you have a pitch session Friday night, you have a day off Saturday and you're training Sunday. So you have a 4-day split, so to speak, okay? So you get your schedule. Now, how, from a player standpoint, do you manage that load, right? Based on the fact that you are a farmer. I'm going to give you, like, let's call it a spade, rural sport, GEA, lots of the farming community. It's January. You're probably calving in a couple of weeks. You have done nothing for the last 2 months, right? You've enjoyed and had a good Christmas. And now you're going to have 4 nights of the week where there's this big demand. How would you prioritize that training load, okay? In terms of pitch sessions versus gym sessions, in terms of how could you bridge the gap between the gym and the field? Could you, well, this is what I do, so like microdose some strength work at the end of the training session when you're already pre-fatigued. Pick the low-hanging fruit, and I'm just talking generally now. I'm not talking about dealing with a specific player with a specific injury history, but I'm talking about, you know, building capacity through hamstrings and so forth, right? So how would you manage that workload?
It's tough. It's not easy. It's the first thing I'll say. And there is no clear answer. As I said, it's huge, and sometimes it's trading off what is optimal for what is practical and what is desirable. I think often we fall into the trap of thinking everything is about maximizing and optimizing adaptation, which is true. That is what our aim is. But it's about optimizing and maximizing the adaptation for your given scenario and context. Yes, you know, if people wanted to really maximize the amount of adaptation they can get from their training, you quit your job. You become a full-time athlete. That is not an option. So therefore, we just have to, I think, first of all, have that shift in mindset of, yes, I could adapt more and I could even get to higher levels of athletic performance, but it's not going to happen. It's just about getting as high as I possibly can and getting the best adaptations I can for my given lifestyle and my given situation. So once you understand that, I think, and don't fall in this trap of trying to be the perfect athlete, that is a good starting point. Now, you have your basics, you know what I mean? You don't want to shoot yourself in the foot. Your sleep, get your sleep nailed down. These kind of lifestyle factors, your environmental factors, you want to set those up. Because as our bodies have a maximal adaptive capacity, you know what I mean, adaptative capacity. So at any one point, we're going to have several factors kind of drawing on that, stresses, because that's all training is. We're applying stresses to the body, and we're hoping that we apply the appropriate amount of stress that our body can tolerate and positively adapt to. Now, we have stresses coming from all different facets of our life. We have, in an ideal world, the majority of our stress would be coming from training or athletic training. And that's where the majority of our adaptive capacity is taken up with, is dealing with that training stress. But that's not true. We have work stress, personal stress, you know, all these different stresses that are being placed on the body, and training stress is just one of them. So with this idea is we have all these stresses we can put on, and we have this maximal adaptive capacity. Now, in order to keep that adaptive capacity at as big as we can, there's things we can do that either shrink that adaptive capacity or increase it. You know, having poor shit sleep, that decreases it. So therefore, you can't tolerate the same level of stress you're sacrificing. Your nutrition is poor, that again decreases it. You have high personal stress or life stress, that decreases it. So all of a sudden, the amount of stress you can tolerate or apply to that individual is decreased. So that's going to hinder your adaptation. So they're your basics. You know, set your nutrition up, set your sleep up, that we're at least having the maximal adaptive capacity for your given situation. So that's what I would say. And on that, I think what people tend to forget, people tend to remember sleep and nutrition. People forget the idea of emotional or personal stress or life stress then as well. That will shrink that adaptive capacity. As a GAA athlete, and especially a high-level performing GAA athlete, it can be very all-consuming. I would argue that intercounties may be too all-consuming for an amateur status, so we should be moving towards a semi-professional model or some sort of regulation on training load demands and demands from it. So what I find with a lot of players is they never switch off, and the modern way of communication facilitate or kind of enhance that, because what the second you come back from training, the WhatsApp group is pinging. Your day off, the WhatsApp group is pinging. You're never switching off. So my advice is set up your life that, and now this is something everyone struggles with. I'm very much for when you're on, you're on, when you're off, you're off. And that's it. You know, as a player, a football player, you're on when you're at the training grounds, when you're in the gym with the squad, when you're at a sign trainers, that's your 4 nights a week. That's when you're switched on. That's when you're trying to park life stress, park everything else, and GA is your focus. Outside of that, my advice is switch off and try to forget about the GA as much as you can. In terms of practical advice, what that means, when you come out of training, mute that WhatsApp group. I personally don't want to be hearing that. I don't want to be reminded of it, because where do the biggest life stresses come from a lot of our GA players? It's from the other people, the other important areas of their life, giving out or making them feel guilty that they're being sacrificed. So if you have personal relationships, wife, girlfriend, kids, or whatever, a lot of the life stresses we see athletes coming on is a sense of guilt or conflict arising from those people feeling they're not getting enough attention, or from you feeling you're not giving them enough attention. So when you come home from training, for the significant people in the life, they don't want to see you after being away, working all day, training all evening, coming home and then just straight into the WhatsApp group with the team and talking to them, when you should be talking to your kids, talking to your partner, whatever it be. So that, I think, is very important, to set your life up that you can minimize stresses. So those nights off, you work on the personal areas of your life, be that career and personal relationship or whatever your priorities are. I think that's important for GA athletes to know what their priorities are, because GA is a huge priority, but what are the other priorities in your life? And in your off time, they're the priorities you're working on, and they're usually either career or personal relationships and personal development. So they're important things. And I know that sounds a bit hippy dippy, but when you do that, all of a sudden that brings down a lot of the life stresses that we see associated with this kind of chronic burnout, I suppose, is what you see. It's because people are never switching off. Where if people can set up their environment that they're sleeping well, they're eating well, and they're switching on and off appropriately, then that kind of brings down a lot of the conflict that people tend to see arise from having such high training demands, and allows them to relax and have reduced anxiety around the training, and get into, if you want to get technical, get into this parasympathetic dominant state that we're not always hyped up and fatiguing ourselves through that. So that's how I'd set up your life in terms of holistic overview. In terms of the actual training, yeah, if you are farming all day, you know what I mean, you're getting a lot of physical demand. Most guys are probably getting enough strength work, enough muscular endurance work. Once your body composition's in track through your nutrition, you'll probably have a decent amount of muscle mass, decent amount of strength, that we can get away with a bit of microdosing in terms of, now if your strength is not where it needs to be, you know, we can throw in 1 or 2 gym sessions a week there will usually be enough in the GA athlete to bring strength up to the appropriate level that needs to be. Because it's not that difficult to get guys to 1.7 times body weight squat. It's really not. If you're squatting twice a week, you'll get there in 6 months if you're a half decent athlete with consistent training. And the same thing with pressing strength with your major sessions. So I definitely think 2 to 3 at most good gym sessions a week is more than enough for most GA players, coupled with your 2 to 3 running sessions. Now, your club training is likely going to do most of your conditioning for you. There might be some minor things you need to do by yourself, but I do like this concept of microdose. And a lot of people talk about speed development and high speed. Rock up 10 minutes early to training, do a little warm up, get 5 to 10 minutes of high speed sprint work done in a nice fresh state before training. So now all of a sudden we're training the skill of moving fast, we're improving our sprint performance, but we're also reducing known risk factor for injury. We know that one of the most protective things we can do as a field space athlete is sufficient exposure to high speed maximal running with maximal intent. We do that in training. Then as after the cool down, we spend 5 minutes, get a few of those sprints in as well. So now we're exposing the musculature and the joints, ligaments and tendons to the force vectors and the velocities in both that they're going to be exposed to in a game in both a fatigued and a fresh state, which is going to reduce your risk of injury. Now, good S&C will integrate this into a warm-up and cool-down themselves with a bit of deacceleration and cutting work as well in both a fresh and fatigued state. But yeah, I think I feel like I'm starting to ramble now, but they're the biggest things where we tend to straight away jump into the technical side of stuff, rep ranges, intensities, that kind of stuff, managing training load. But I think a lot of guys would be much better off kind of taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture of how to set up their environment and their lifestyle to facilitate the ability to, instead of getting more into managing that training load, because the training load is usually out of your control. As a GA player, you're rocking up 2-3 times a week to the club. You don't have a say and much autonomy in the amount of training load you're going to be under. That's left to the powers that be, the S&C and the management. What you do have control over is your lifestyle. So instead of trying to kind of predict what the training load's going to be and manage that, why not set up an environment or a lifestyle that facilitates a higher training load, or that you have a higher adaptive capacity, so you're better able to handle any given training load that you're exposed to then?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and it's what would be nice to be done versus what needs to be done. And when you sit back, there's loads we could do, but the truth of it is, within the GA community and as an athlete and a coach, we just don't have time to do it all. So then we pick the low hanging fruit. And as you were talking there, you started with that stress management and that holistic overview. So again, because I want coaches to be able to take some real usable pieces from this. There's another exercise that I've done with 2 teams I've worked with now, and I call it I want an appreciation day. Okay, so what I've done is I've got the players to cook breakfast for the girlfriends, wives, and partners. Okay, so what it involves is the management don't have anything to do with it. The players organize it. So they buy the food, they prepare the food, they serve the food, they organize where it goes ahead. Okay, so it's generally in the clubhouse. Then the girlfriends and the wives and the mothers and the partners come in and they sit down, and the lads wait on them for the morning. They walk over, they pour their tea, they pour out their coffee, they make them the breakfast, they serve them, they wait on them for 2 hours. It's all about those people. And I mean, like, in terms of setting a tone, because again, we're talking about like everything that our job is essentially microdosing stress. That's what our job is. Whatever type of stress it is, it's all about stress and how much we're going to dose out. And the truth of it is, and you alluded to it, most of the stress is going to come from lifestyle stress as opposed to what we place them under. And if we know, then from a coaching standpoint, that we have players who are going home to people who support them, people who aren't arguing with them, people who are encouraging them, then it's really safe to know that, because you know that that's the environment that you're setting up outside of training. Because an awful lot of the time we don't have control of that. And then not only that, you have this connection among the partners and the families and so forth, and you're building a bigger group outside of that as well. And I must say, it has worked really well the 2 times that. And I actually go back to one of the clubs. It's a senior hurling club in Cork, and I've been back there a few times, and I've met mothers, and that's still the one thing they talk about. I've met.
I like it. I haven't heard of that done before, and I don't know why when you're saying it, the kind of what say naked butler Chippendale kind of image was coming into my head. But no, I really like that idea, and again, it is bringing in, because players need that support network, because it is a huge sacrifice. You know what I mean? It's not just the player making the sacrifice. It is the wives, the girlfriends, the partners, boyfriends, whatever it is, and children to a certain degree. So you do need that support network. And I think that's going to even become more important in the coming months, because, you know what I mean? If you are training hard, you need to recover, and you're going home. And I think a lot of people are going to end up arguing about financial worries in the coming year, unfortunately. If you're going home and all you are stressing about is, can I pay the mortgage? Will I be able to put clothes on my kids' back? If you don't have a good support network, if you're going home and your training is, you know what I mean? If you're going home and Jesus, I'm heading straight into a row when I go in, you're never going to adapt as good as you can be if you're going into a relaxed environment where it's a support network, where we're all in this kind of together, and you know what I mean? And there is research to show that, psychological stress can lead to physical manifestations and fatigue. But even anecdotally, most people have suffered grief in their life, and say a death of a loved one or a close relative. What happens when someone dies? You end up doing very little physical activity, but you're very fatigued. You're wrecked. And that's grief. It's the psychological influence in the physiological. And if you think they're separate, you're very naive. And I remember in a seminar, what I've done before, and I'll often do this, is so I'll be giving my presentation, and then I put a slide on the board, which is an animation of banana with the caption, "Let's get naked," is on it. And this banana is peeling itself. But at that stage, I'll be like, oh yeah, I need a volunteer from the audience. And I'll pick out someone. So all of a sudden they're saying, okay, let's get naked. I say, I need someone to come up to the front and engage in something with me. And so you might get one or two people up their hands. I'll pick someone that hasn't put up their hand. And I'm like, you'll come up with me. And then I'll pause for a couple of seconds. I'm like, okay, no. I was like, you don't have to. But looking at you now, you haven't moved. Nothing has happened from a physical perspective. You haven't moved, but your heart rate's elevated. You're flushed in the face. So your appraisal of a situation and your psychological processes have resulted in a physiological response. That is a very clear, and we've all done that, where, sitting outside an interview, you're nervous, you're sweating, the heart rate's up, whatever it may be. You're not doing any physical exertions, but you're having a distinct physiological response. So that is a very clear example of the psychology can indeed influence physiology, and we should never look at them as separate entities.
100%. All right, so now we have moved off that. We're starting to play a few games, right? So we're starting to play a couple of friendly matches, even league matches with the build up to championship, right? So this is my view on games, right? So, all right, so a league match is the closest thing you're going to get. It's the closest thing you're going to get to championship. From a match play demands, from a psychological, from a tactical, the purity of the game, right? It's the closest thing you're going to get. And then you have your friendly matches, and then you have your training matches, right? However, where the rubber meets the road, the truth of it is you do see friendly matches, and it's really hard for lads to lift, especially more experienced lads, to lift for those friendly matches, right? So just in terms of from the player standpoint, okay, preparing for friendlies, right, or preparing for league matches, in terms of attentional focus, in terms of physical output, okay, are you saying, right, you need to be 100% switched on, treat this as a championship match, and then how does that lead into the season? Or would you give a little bit of leeway there with that?
It's a very good question. I think even when we say I see a lot of tokenism with this, because we often say, like, guys, treat this as a championship match. I know it's only a friendly, but treat this as whatever. It depends on the team. If it's a team where there's a lad chomping at the bit to get your place and your place in worry, then maybe for you that is a championship match, because it's the make or break of whether you be on the panel. But in a lot of clubs, there's 12 people at the starting team who are, you know what I mean, they're going to be starting championship, and that's it. There's maybe 3 places that are actually up for grabs in most teams, in my experience, and that's going to vary by 1 or 2 or 3 depending on the club. To tell guys, treat it as a championship match, it can't be. The championship is championship. Anyone that's been involved in there, it's a different atmosphere, it's a different animal completely. So to say that you're going to be able to get yourself to that level of arousal, or the psychological kind of state, I don't think it's really possible. It's just, from my anecdotal experience, it can't be. And I'm not a psychologist. I won't speak to the the psychological underpinnings of it. But for me, it can't be. So I tend to focus more on objective outcomes, and it depends. If it's a friendly match, I think friendly matches should be more experimental, allow guys a bit more rope. If they end up hanging themselves with that rope or tripping themselves, so be it. But I like players to be pushing the boundaries. Friendlies is where we can make the mistakes. That's where we explore the game. That's where we explore the edges of how we play the game, and give free rein for player creativity to come to the fore. If it works, because the thing is, in training, we can get creative, but we can't really, because our players know each other too well. They know where guys move. They know what their kind of tricks are. Where these ideas that great players have of different ways of moving, different ways of playing the ball, of executing skills, we give them the free rein to do that in a friendly match, because they're against a proponent that can't really react appropriately or anticipate, because they don't know the player as well, say. So they can see if it works in a real life scenario or not. And that's what you need. You need players to be able to, okay, I tried to execute that skill. I thought that it'd work, but now against a real opponent, I see that it doesn't. I see that there's a pitfall in my idea that they were able to identify and close down. So that's what I think. But I do like in the idea of using these friendlies to, right, what new skills have we learned? What new strategies we learned? That's what we're implementing. I don't want you to, try to get your arousal up to the level of championship, but rather I want you to use this is a scenario for you to execute that skill under full intensity game situations. So, and from a player, it depends. I know personally, players tend to view the game as a whole, but if you can really break it down, if you're struggling to get up for a game, or if you're, trying to go through the paces, break that game. Every game is 61-minute battles. You know what I mean? It's you versus your opponent. It's cliche, but it is 61-minute battles. And whoever wins 31 or 32 of those battles comes out as the better player for that match. If you have 15 players who each win more than 30 of their battles, then all of a sudden you have a winning team, or 15 times 60. So that's 9,000 battles, you say, is going on the pitch. Your team comes out with more than 4,500 battles, likely you're going to win that. And as a player, I think that can be very much, and especially players in the friendly in the season when you're fatigued and you're 10 minutes into the game and you're gasping, it can be very easy to psychologically break down the big goal into micro goals. Right, I'm gasping, but for the next minute, for the next play, or even as a back, I tend to see it in plays, the next run this guy goes, I'm winning. I'm coming out on top of that. We accomplish that goal. And again, if we are going right from the start, success breeds success. If I lose the first 5 battles, I feel my fatigue a lot more than if I've won the first 5 battles. And that's personally what I found is good with guys, just to break stuff down into actionable. And, and guys, be aware that, you put in every battle one by one, you beat them. If it's a case you get to the fatigue level that you need to come off, we've guys that can come in. And that's where it's important to have that strong team and that strong panel, that guys realize that, they need to put the team ahead of themselves individually, and they go in, do their shift. And there's plenty of players we know that have 40 minutes in them and that's it. They have that capacity that no matter how much we train them, they have 50 minutes in them, and that last 10 minutes, they're always wrecked. That we have a guy that can come in and put in his shift for that last 10 minutes to see out the game. So that's just one way I found personally, but there are plenty of other ways to skin a cat in that, and I'm open to other ideas around that.
Yeah, very good. That's excellent. And then, all right, we're back to looking at this from the coach's perspective, right? So the inter-county player comes back in from the National Hurling and Football League to your panel 2 weeks before championship, right? How do you treat him? Now, I think this is something that has always fascinated me through the years in coaching, to see some of the coaches that I have worked with and how they treat the inter-county player who comes back into the setup again. Personally, I leave him alone. I don't weigh in him for anything. I don't really treat him any different than anyone else. I feel that they've come off the back end of a really tough slog with their county. They've come off the back end of the National Hurling or Football League. There was a big element of fatigue. I don't really want to see them for the first week at all, really. I just, they've, especially depending on how long they've went in their campaign and how successful that was, But then I just allow them the space to just enjoy their hurling back with their club again. Not feeling too much pressure, not feeling like they have to be the rock of the team again. Just go out. The only expectation is that they will give their all, apply a really good attitude, and weigh their experience and their ability into the team for the betterment of the team. Whereas I've been in situations before where the inter-county player comes back, he's demanded back on the Tuesday night, you know what I mean? There's a big meeting with him before training. He's been asked to drive the standards, and there's an awful lot expected of him. And look, come here, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, because who am I to judge? I'm just giving you my opinion, or at least my experiences of that. So what are yours?
Yeah, and it's something we see up and down the country happen. And first of all, I would agree that there shouldn't be a big hullabaloo mad about putting pressure on them and this idea of they're coming in to uplift the team, because again, you're creating a hierarchical structure. You're saying to the players that have been there putting in the slog all the year, you're saying, this guy is better than you. He's coming in, which, look, you don't need to tell a club player that a county player is better than them. They know full well that the county player is a better footballer than them. So as a coach, you don't need to tell them. You don't need to make that clear. And you're coming in, you want that player to integrate back into the squad. You want it to be seamless. So don't make a big deal about it. Just get on with it as best you can, because you don't want to alienate them from the group, which it happens in clubs right up the... How many times have we heard that? It's like, he's a county player, he's not a club player, he's head up his own arse. Yeah, we hear it up and down the country. Yeah. So they want to come back in. You want that transition to be seamless. Now, so for the club players, you don't need to make that distinction, because they know he's better than them or she's better than them or wherever it is. They don't need to be told that. For the player themselves, for me, to pull a county player aside and say, look, you're county, there's expectations and you need to come in and lift these lads up. That in itself, and again, if the rest of the squad is hearing you say that, because this is often said publicly even, or if a lot of people see that meeting going on beforehand, what is that saying? That's saying that if you're telling a county player to come in, you need to drag these boys up. That is saying that the standard the team is at is subpar. It's below a standard we want it to be at. But if we have set our standard with the club from the high, so instead of this kind of, and again, my friend Hugh Gilmore speaks a lot about this idea of deficit-based coaching. You know what I mean? What do we do as coaches a lot of time? We identify the issues and tell our guys, look, this is what you're doing. We don't want to do that. We want to eliminate that from our game. Instead of, why not create a standard to which we all aspire to reach? Instead of give guys a goal to reach to. Instead of telling a squad not what to do, tell them where we want them to get to and allow them to find their way there and everyone to work up to a goal rather than guys trying to eliminate a goal. Because if the county players frame that way, that you're in here to drag these guys up, that's putting a lot of pressure on the county player who, again, they don't need to be told, look, there's an expectation on you to be the best player on that pitch. They already know that expectation is on them. The fact they're a county player coming back into club, the distinction between club and county is there. There is an expectation that a county player is better than a club player. Therefore, the county player is already putting enough pressure and expectation on themselves to come in. Because what do we often see in clubs happen? The county player comes back and they end up actually training very poorly with the squad because they're taking shots that they'd never take with the county. They're trying to pull off skills. They're trying to work at a level that they never even worked at. They're trying to perform better at club than they ever performed at county. So we see that, and if anyone reflects, we've seen it all in clubs. That is because they're already putting enough pressure on themselves. They believe, they know they're expected to be better than everyone else on that pitch. That you as a coach don't need to put that extra pressure on them. So that's one factor. And if they are told, and the rest team, as I said, are told, come in, that, look, you need to bring these guys up, that's already sending a message to the rest of the squad that your standard isn't where we want it to be, or there's something not as good with you guys that this person is going to come in and elevate it up. And usually it's the county players expect to do this in 2 weeks, what the management couldn't do in 8 months. You know what I mean? It doesn't make sense to me. So again, bring them in. But then again, I think culturally, there should be a culture there that there is not that separation. There shouldn't be this big homecoming of the county player. They should be inclusive in the squad from day one. And how you do that, so many different ways as a coach is for you to come up. they're time poor because they're in with the county. So maybe they can't come to training sessions, but if it's once or twice a month, you can get them into a squad day. You can get them in, make sure they're involved in, say, the WhatsApp group to a certain degree, or they're doing something that there isn't this separation of they're with the county and then they come back to club. They're always with the club, just they're also with the county. That, you know what I mean? It's not that you're with club and then you're with county and then you're back with club. No, you're always with the club. Just for a certain period of the year, you're also with the county. Does that make sense?
100%. Yeah, 100%. And then back to the player's perspective, okay? You're moving into championship week, okay? And I'm going to dare to use the word taper for the week, or how do you prepare? Now, on a side note, I probably think it takes most club teams 6 weeks to get over their preseason anyway. But anyway, look, let's go past that. You're gone into your taper week, the week before championship, right? You're a player. What does that week look like? Do you build up? Do you taper down? Do you cut your gym session if you have that gym session on that Wednesday night? What does that look like? And I know that's so open-ended that it's probably really hard to give a definite answer, but just a generalization.
Yeah, it is tough. Like, in terms of the tapering, should be, again, it's out of your control. A lot of the time it's up to the club when they decide to put the training sessions on, the intensity of those final few training sessions. For me, championship week should not change all that much in terms of your sleep should be already taken care of. Your nutrition should already be on point coming in there. Our body likes rhythms. It likes routine. And I see guys in championship week doing stuff that is off the wall. If you're sleeping 8 hours a night and all of a sudden you say, right, for the 2-3 nights beforehand, I'm getting 11 hours. Everyone knows, anecdotally, you oversleep. You get up, you feel sluggish, you feel shit because you're out of routine. You're trying to push your body into a slightly different circadian rhythm than it's already in. Why do that? If, you know what I mean, it's this idea of if your environment is already good and optimized, you can't over-optimize. You know what I mean? You can't go to this super optimized level. So if it's already good enough, why do we need to push it on? So your sleep and nutrition, all that should be there. So your tapering should be there. Again, I think with championship, maybe too many guys don't switch off enough. So it's all they're doing. They're thinking about it and obsessing about it so much. And then they get themselves worked up so much that they go out and they're nearly afraid to make mistakes on the day. You know what I mean? If you've been playing well in league and in the build-up, why would you go out and then all of a sudden expect to do something totally different on the day of championship? And I see so many management, even guys taking supplements on the day of championship they've never touched in their life. And a lot of them end up with the shits at half time because they've never trialed it beforehand. But, you know what I mean? Again, you treat it like every other game and you just expect that, yeah, I'm going to go in there, probably going to be a bit nervous, probably going to be a bit more hyped up, but you accept that you're going to be there. You don't start worrying, geez, I'm a bit more nervous than I usually am. I'm a bit more, that's perfectly fine. Soak in that environment. That's why you go to play football. It's those days, and accept that is going to happen. And even in your visualization beforehand, you're visualizing going into the stadium or the grounds, and you're visualizing, being a bit nervous, being a bit jumpy. But once you know that's going to happen, then when it actually does happen, you're like, yeah, well, I knew this was going to happen. It's in my control. And again, it's cliche, but control the controllables. Don't add in extra stresses. You have your gear ready. You know what's going to happen when you're going in. And then what's out of your control, especially in COVID, there's so much stuff that's out of our control now in terms of the way matches are set up. If you can control it, so if something is a problem or something's giving you anxiety, you ask yourself, is there something I can do to change that situation? If there is, well, then do it. If there's not, accept, okay, it's out of my control. Me worrying about it is not going to change the outcome. Therefore, why should I worry about it? Easier said than done, but it's a habit. You get into that habit. Like I maybe it's just me, maybe it's some sort of robotic nature I have, but I often infuriate people because I'm overly rational, I believe, or too detached sometimes from emotion, where I'll often, I know I've been in an instance where I've had a flat tire in the car or someone has scratched the car and I get out and I'm like, oh, okay, right, let's change tire. And where other people like, oh, for fuck's sake, and they're all this, but, and people like, that not annoy you? I was like, Why will that change the tire being flat? It won't. You know what I mean? So again, that's probably not normal human behavior. It's probably
But
some sort of worrying sign. But me worrying about it or reacting negatively to it isn't going to change the outcome. What can I do? I can change the tire.
Okay, and let's bring that to dealing with injury, right? So played the championship match, you're after picking up a niggle, you have, I won't even talk about the current, let's talk about the current situation. So you probably have a week, okay? Because you'll probably have a match the next round again next week, okay? But let's talk like you have quite a rational way of dealing with things, okay? So psychologically being injured is it's a really tough thing to deal with, okay? Either it be long-term or short-term if you're working against the clock, because you don't know when to pull, when to push. You're taking the advice of a physiotherapist. Hopefully, if your club team has a physiotherapist, more often than not, it's going to be / physical therapist who gives a rub, you know, so you're taking their advice. Hopefully a good club would be able to outsource to a chartered physiotherapist where you can get a little bit more professional advice. Then you have maybe a little bit of pressure coming from management, a little pressure coming from your peers, pressure coming from home in many cases as well. Right, so how do you deal with that psychological component of the injury, right, during that week?
That's interesting. Again, I'll preface this with, I'm not a psychologist. It's not my area at all. So I'm talking totally from anecdotal experience here. And I could be completely wrong in what I am saying, but this is coming from my anal rationality. We have a very distinct outcome. So first of all, when you get injured, you're pissed off, you're annoyed, you're frustrated. Accept that they are normal reactions to an injury. They're normal. Don't beat yourself up over being this annoyed about it, but accept that, okay, these emotions are here. Why do I feel this way? And kind of have a rational discussion with yourself and why am I annoyed? And more than likely you're annoyed is you're worried that you're not going to be able to play the next match. So, okay, that's my frustration. That's fine. We've acknowledged that. Now let's park that. What can I actually do to do it? And it is consult an appropriate person who will be able to offer you advice on the injury. So that is a chartered physiotherapist in most cases. They will give you a course of rehab. Most good physios, or what I class as good physios that work in sport, will give you two scenarios. They'll give you, this is an ideal world. If you weren't a footballer, what we do, this is championship next week. This is your percentage. Look, this is what, if you want to play next Sunday and you're going to ignore my voice anyway, if I tell you take 3 weeks off, this is what I'd recommend you do. But you're doing that in the full knowledge that there's maybe a 60% chance this will re-rupture or it'll flare up and you won't play next week. But a good physio, or, you know, those type of physios will give you that option because they understand you'll ignore their advice and you're going to try push for that championship. So follow that plan. But what I would also do then is take that a step further and reverse engineer. If you're going to play on a Sunday, then you know where you need to be on a Saturday to be able to get to that stage. You know what physically you need to be able to do on a Saturday. You know then on a Friday, to be able to do that on a Friday, my body needs to be in this position on the Thursday evening. And like that, you reverse engineer where you need to be and what can I do each day to get myself to that next milestone. So it's even just as a lot of time, frustration I find with injury is because it's the lack of control. We're going to a situation where when we're on a field, we're in control of how we move and how we react to stuff. When we're injured, we want to do it, but we feel like that sense of control has been stripped away from us, that I just have to sit here and, you know me, I can't take action to accelerate the healing. Where if you break it down into, okay, this is where I need to be Tuesday, this is where I need to be Wednesday, chat to the physio, what can I do each day to get to that stage, to get me to those individual milestones that gets me with a good chance of I have at least an opportunity to go do the warm-up on the day championship and see how I feel and then see if I'm able to go and play. And then that gives you little mini goals, little actionable goals. Of a Monday I get up, it's okay, I can sit on the couch and ice and whatever, or I can do the rehab that the physio gave me to do today. Okay, success breeds success. I was able to do that rehab today. I was able to bridge without a pain in the hamstring going above 3 out of 10. Okay, that's good. I've taken action today. Tomorrow, where do I want to be tomorrow? What do I have to do that? I have to sleep well, I have to eat well. And now tomorrow you do the next Usually say a lot of our rehab is isometric to eccentric to concentric to high velocity concentric. That is generally what we're doing, and then linear to multi-directional. So we're doing that day by day. We're breaking it down. Like, I need to be able to hold an isometric contraction of that muscle without going 3/10 on a pain scale. Then I need to do eccentric lengthening without getting past a certain threshold of pain or functionality. Then I go into full range of motion. Each day, you know what you need to be able to get to, and then that breaks down into little actionable goals that eventually you just want to be able to do the warm-up on day championship and see and hope that luck is with you, that the body is able to be there. And I suppose from the outset, you're making that acknowledgement of, I'm going to do everything in my power to get myself back for that match, but I accept, and I'll be honest with myself, there is a chance that I won't be there. And if that is the reality of the situation, what then? Because this is the problem, is we have one line of attack, and when that doesn't work out, people panic and get down on themselves. What then? If I get to the warm-up and it's not there, what then? And then it's, right, well, then I know I've got myself to a certain level this week. I've 2 weeks till the next round of championship. That's the next goal. Same thing, reverse engineer. Where do I need to be? What can I do to give myself the best chance? And at the end of the day, if you're not able to make it, the injury doesn't allow you to get there, you know you've given yourself the best opportunity to get back, even if it didn't come to fruition. Mm-hmm. Again, that's me speaking just as an S&C anecdotally. Whether that's right from a psychological or a rehabilitative state, professionally speaking, I'm not qualified to say.
Yeah, well, look, it sounds like pretty logical and I suppose very well pieced together and research piece of advice, like, you know, so I would concur with a lot of what you said there, right? So let's move forward. You either, look, we are sport, you win or lose, okay? So the season is finished and now we have our off season, okay? Now I'm going to ask this final question from both the coaches and the players' standpoint, right, or perspective. I think a couple of things we don't speak about an awful lot in I guess, in our area is the concept of coach burnout. Okay, we speak an awful lot about monitoring the training load of our athletes and so forth. And I think that there's an awful lot of pressure on coaches that we definitely take our work home. There's no shadow of a doubt about that. Mm. Once we come home from a training session, those GPS pods don't, you know what I mean? They don't just magically upload data themselves and so forth. So there's an awful lot of pressure, time commitment that goes into being an S&C coach and a skills coach or a manager, right? So what do you do as a coach in the off season, right? And then from a player standpoint, you've overreached. Okay, that's the whole underpinning concept of sport. You're working at the edge of your ability. You're pushing your body to the ultimate demands that you can place on it. You've spent X amount of months doing that, right? To me, it's your opportunity to build wellness, to build health, to allow your body to settle, maybe learn new skills, right? We know in the GA world, you go back to play with your club, right? So then your off season becomes even more narrow from an elite player, right? But let's just talk about from a club player, okay? The off season, what are the one or two principles that you would suggest? So coach first, player second.
Funnily enough, the principles apply the same across coach and player. And that is, first of all, the end of season, reflective practice is very important. Actually debriefing yourself personally and as a squad about the year you just had. What did we do well? Why did we think we did those things well? What could we have done better? I won't even say what we did bad, but what could we have done better? And digging into the why. And then doing that on a personal level. How did I coach this year? How did I play this year? And trying to dig into, did I give myself the best opportunity? What could I have done better? What do I want to change going forward? And this is this concept in athletes I call the immediate limiting factor, or the most limiting factor. And that is, with any given time from physical standpoint, there are, you know what I mean? I say for my athletes, for the next 4 weeks, if I was asked what physical component, if I improved, would lead to the biggest improvement in performance? Is it power development? Is it strength? Is it body composition? So that's from a very S&C perspective. You could say that, you know, that is your limiting factor. Then you work on that. And then okay, now what's my next limiting factor? And these are your priorities. What's my most limiting factor? What's my second, third, fourth? That if I worked on that leads to the biggest transfer into improved performance. The same can be said for you as a player or a coach. What are my biggest limiting factors? Is it my communication? Is it my perception? My ability to read the game? So understanding that, and that gives you a general focus of in the off season, okay, maybe I need to learn a bit more about that. How do I go about changing that? What can I do to do that? Now, what I would say is you're very right. Coach burnout's very much a thing. I think most of us don't want to step away from sport, but I very much think a change is as good as a rest. And what I will do with my athletes in the off season is get them into a different sport, get them, different, because if you're rugby players and you start taking up a bit of, I don't know, triathlon training or, well, that's probably not the best because a lot of heavy impact, but swimming or a bit of stuff that gets them trying something new, learning new skills, exposed to different movement varieties, different force vectors. One thing I encourage GA guys to do is get a bit of trail running in, because first of all, I think there's a great psychological benefit just getting up into the mountains, this idea of switching off, getting out into nature, but also trail running. It's so much perturbation training and uneven. You're exposing the ligaments and ankles, because most players have bad ankles or whatever. It's exposing the feet and the ankles and the joints to so much movement variety and perturbation in the ground. So I think that's great from reducing the risk of injury then chronically going forward. But from a coaching perspective, and it's something I wanted to do a lot in 2020, but COVID has inhibited this, is go coach other sports. Go talk with coaches of other sports. There's nothing more invigorating and refreshing as a coach to go get onto another coach and say, can I come down and watch you coach squash for an hour? And then ask and watch another sport, watch how they coach, and then have a chat with them. So that you usually come out, you've made a connection, you've built your network, which is always a good thing as coaching. But then you're getting to see different sports, different ways of moving, how athletes move in different ways, and how different coaches coach in different ways. If you're a private facility, go to a different gym, go down to a powerlifting gym and say, can I come in and see what a powerlifting session works with, or train with you for a day? Do that once a month, aim to do that once a month. Go meet a different coach, go do a different variety. Because again, I just feel you're not going to step back from sport, because if you're coaching, you're probably obsessed with sport to a certain degree. But just to be able to see this different variety, I think it opens you up to different communication styles, different coaching styles, different practices. And then with that, is you limited. Usually communication is one of the biggest things coaches need to work on, and us as a whole need to work on. So maybe the off season is you do a bit of personal self-development in something that is not sport related, but can benefit sport hugely. Something like motivational interviewing. If anyone doesn't know what motivational interviewing is, look it up, get involved in it. I think it can be something extremely valuable for people to have, both within their professional lives and their sporting and coaching lives and personal lives. So that's what I do more from a kind of a holistic perspective. And again, from a very pragmatic perspective, understanding, like, if your off season is 3-4 months, take that first month off or first 2 weeks off and actually switch off. Get away from it. Get completely away and don't be involved in it. But then for the rest of the time, I think it is valuable to identify what is my limiting factor. As a player, is a body composition, right? Performance in the off season, it doesn't matter if you're not performing well. Take this time to go into that larger calorie deficit, to make those body composition changes. If you need to pack on muscle, we know that hypertrophy training in season is quite difficult because there's a lot of associated fatigue from it. But in the off season, we can do heavy fatigue and hypertrophy training because we don't care about performance. We just care about this adaptation that then will potentiate sport performance when we come back into the next preseason. So, and then a lot of players love getting into a bit of kind of hypertrophy bodybuilding style training in the off season because they improve their aesthetics. Like, you know what I mean? We all train, yes, for sport performance, but if we're able to improve our aesthetics as a byproduct, I've never heard a player complain about having bigger biceps. I've never heard them come to me complaining about that before. So I think from players' perspective, what are your main weaknesses? And obviously your injuries. If you have an injury history, you're coming off, you're doing your prehab, you're working on those injuries, trying to reduce those. But if you're injury free, what are your biggest weaknesses? Is it body composition? Work on that. Is it power max strength? Work on whatever that is, the skill that you need to work on. But then again, get out into a different sport, give your brain a bit of a change. You're learning new skills, you're challenging your cognitive abilities in different ways, and just enjoyment. You're trying something new. You're getting out of the monotony of being just in GA all year. And as a coach, reflect on what you need to do better as a coach. Go talk to other coaches, bounce ideas, and that's, again, get into different sports. Even volunteer to coach a different sport that you never coached in before, to, again, shadow a coach, see what they do for night, and then, okay, for half an hour, can I coach? And now all of a sudden you're coaching a different set of athletes with different beliefs, different values, and you're challenging and you're growing. Because I think burnout happens, yes, when you're fatigued, but it happens then as well when you feel yourself getting stale. When you're progressing and learning and feel yourself progressing, it's much easier to take on a huge workload than when you feel you're stagnating and have a huge workload.
Yeah, that's excellent. And just to add to that, I was actually involved with a club one time, and they had a policy that when they were knocked out of championship, that the players, they would lock the gym door for the first month and they wouldn't allow the players playing. But what they did do is they had a kind of an unwritten rule that the players would coach within the club. So they weren't playing, but the players went back because they knew they weren't going to walk away from sport anyway. But they just got them integrated among the underage teams within the club. So then they start coaching. And of course, we all know that, look, if you learn a skill deeper when you start to coach it and pass it on as well. So there was those kind of benefits as well. Come here, Dave. We could go for another hour. We're on here now a good while. We will do a round two because there were so many rabbit holes we could have ran down there. I just wanted to give a brief overview of the season from both the coaches and the players' perspective, and just throw different scenarios and tease things out. Okay, so Dave, come here. I want to thank you so much for popping on and giving so much time, and again, so much of your knowledge as well, because I really do admire your work. Okay.
It was a pleasure, Adrian. Thanks so much. I did really enjoy that conversation and exploring different rabbit holes. So thanks so much for having me on.
You're more than welcome, my man. Thank you very much, Dave.